Hello, my name is Daryl Robert Schoon. The topic today is coronavirus crises, the economic collapse, today and tomorrow. Regarding the economic collapse, I'd like to start this out by reading a paper I wrote in 2008, or reading from it. And it is called Triage in the Financial Markets. I want you to remember that this was written 4 months before markets collapsed in the United States in September 2008. This was from May 2008. And this is what I wrote. Global financial markets today are in extreme triage following the credit contraction of August 2007. It is believed central bankers are trying to restore markets to help the economy. In truth, they are like life insurance companies fighting to keep a wealthy patient alive, so the high premiums will continue to be paid and the large death payout will be postponed. This was written before the economic collapse, 1 year after I presented my paper at the Positive Deviant Network predicting a severe economic contraction, and it happened as I predicted 1.5 years later. And what I wrote here was this. Today, bankers don't understand the trouble they're in because what is happening has never happened before, at least to them. The Great Depression was the last time a financial crisis happened on such a scale, but the lessons of the Great Depression were those of another generation, and lessons lost must be relearned by those who never knew them. Unfortunately, we will learn those lessons together as we pay for what we collectively forgot and consciously denied. All of us, even the latecomers to capital markets in Asia, are vulnerable to the sinking boat of credit and debt built by Western bankers over the past 300 years. In May 2008, we are at the cusp of the crisis. Those still in denial hope we are closer to its end than its beginning. But if we are, that means the descent will be quick and brutal instead of protracted and painfully slow. Either way, the end will be the same. The daisy chain of debt constructed by bankers has now connected all of us, the solvent and insolvent alike. Personal solvency will provide but little protection when countries, relatives, neighbors, banks, employers, and employees become insolvent. Gold and silver will be among the few lifeboats, and faith will be invaluable. That was written 12 years ago, almost to the month. Today, it is the beginning of April 2020. The crisis that I predicted then happened 1.5 years later, and its collapse was not quick and brutal. It has been slow and protracted. Trillions of dollars of central bank credit were extended into global economies to delay what I believed then and today is the inevitable. The coronavirus triggered what I predicted then to happen today, and now we're in the midst of it. I want to say something about the credit markets. We hear a lot about the $2 trillion that the United States government is extending both to businesses and to individuals. In truth, the government has expended far greater than that already to the credit markets and to the financial markets. Prior to February of this year, 2020, between September 2019 and February 2020, the Fed already has extended over $4 trillion to prop up faltering credit markets. And today it's doing even more. Forced to do so, the Fed is now buying wholesale IOUs from ETF funds to keep them in a state of solvency so they can extend and redeem the demands upon those funds from worried investors. The truth is, in times of economic collapse, when credit and debt are the basis of the economy, IOUs become worthless. First, corporate IOUs, the worst among them, the junk. Second, corporate IOUs, the better, and the last to go will be government IOUs, Treasury. The only reason that IOUs are still functioning today is that the last resort in these times is government printing presses. And Sandeep Jaitley, my colleague in London, pointed out that what would happen is, in the end game, the U.S. dollar would go up against all other fiat currencies only because it will be the last man standing. And so we are here today. We are in uncharted territories. I don't want to predict what is going to happen, except in a very broad and general sense. And I'm not going to deviate one iota from the predictions I made over 12 years ago about today's credit markets. They are going to collapse. The action in the end will be in the bond markets, not in the equity markets. And the central bankers are going to do everything they can to keep these markets functioning, because they are the ones who have lived off high in the hog for the productivity of individuals, companies, and indeed countries by given the right to issue money in the form of debt. That issuance has come at a cost that we are going to pay collectively. Now, I have been sort of expecting something like this. Of course, I couldn't expect a coronavirus to be the cause, but I've been expecting something like this since the mid-1960s. When I dropped out of law school, I'd taken a copious amount of LSD, and I began reading the writings of Edgar Cayce, a psychic. Now, I want to read the prediction of another psychic, which some of you may know about, and some of you may not. These are the words of Sylvia Browne. And Sylvia Browne, she was a well-known American psychic, and in 2008, she wrote a book called End of Days, Predictions and Prophecies About the End of the World. And I want to quote a paragraph she wrote in that. I bought the book to make sure it was right. In around 220, a severe pneumonia-like illness will spread throughout the globe, attacking the lungs and bronchial tubes and resisting all known treatments. Almost more baffling than the illness itself will be the fact that it will suddenly vanish as quickly as it arrived, attack again 10 years later, and then completely disappear. Now, if you go out and check out Sylvia Browne, there's a lot of shade being tossed on her because, one, the accuracy of what she predicted, and two, people don't want to believe that psychic predictions are true or real, because that really upsets the collective zeitgeist about who we are and what in fact is real. I want to point out something that Martha and I experienced about Sylvia Browne, though not personally. In the 1990s, one of Martha's friends, dear friends, called her up because she was extremely upset. Her daughter had run away. She's beautiful. And she and her husband were just incensed about what had happened. Martha's friend had a huge temper, and she was just basically fuming at the mouth because of the distress she had caused her and how upset she was. Well, during this time, she went to go hear Sylvia Browne. Now, Sylvia Browne was a psychic, very well known and expensive. And Martha's friend did not have the money to pay for a private session. But this is what happened. She's standing in the line for the event to buy her ticket, and one of Sylvia Browne's assistants came out, found her in the line, and said, "You have to come back. Sylvia Browne has a message for you." So Martha's friend went back, and Sylvia Browne told her, didn't charge her, told her this: "Your daughter's coming home, but if you lose your temper, you will never see her again." Well, just like Sylvia Browne predicted, her daughter did come home. And unlike what Martha's friend was going to do, she bit her tongue. Later on, her daughter became sort of famous, but that's beside the point. That's not the story. The story is what we know about Sylvia Browne, what she did in the 1990s, and the prediction she made today. I have been waiting for something like this because of another psychic, Edgar Cayce. The reason why I began reading Edgar Cayce and began studying what he in fact said, because I had taken a lot of acid in the mid-1960s after I dropped out of law school, and in the Haight-Ashbury, Edgar Cayce became what we call the reading of choice. And what Edgar Cayce predicted then was that someday humanity would enter a period of what he called the Golden Age. But it would only do so after huge and protracted earth changes. Now, for those of you who have been reading about the earthquakes yesterday and today in Idaho and Utah, you may take note of it. Because in the center of the country, I think that's where the earthquakes were going to start. The Mississippi River Valley, Edgar Cayce said, we're going to empty into the Great Lakes, we're going to empty into the Mississippi River Valley. and the East Coast and West Coast were eventually going to crumble away, leading to great changes. And in the 1960s, reading about this was quite astounding to us. And I didn't believe them because I believed in psychics or mediums at the time. I believed Edgar Cayce because he had a tremendous amount of heart. He never charged a price for his readings. He was a Sunday school teacher in Kentucky, and the only reason that he had become a psychic was quite inadvertent. He had lost his voice. He couldn't talk, and he'd heard that hypnotism might help him. So he allowed himself to be hypnotized, and when he was in trance, this voice alleging to say it knew all these things. And so they take these recordings, or took shorthand, and showed him to Edgar Cayce when he came out of his state, and it shocked him. But nonetheless, he was a man of heart, and in the Haight-Ashbury, we're open to looking at different things. And what I want to tell you something is this. The things that I've found since then have only confirmed the things that started and I learned in the Haight-Ashbury. Those of you who know of me through my economic writings perhaps don't know that in 1990, words that set me on this path. Words that identified themselves, and they said this. In times of expansion, it is to the hare goes. Quick, risk-taking, and bold, his qualities are exactly suited to the times. In times of contraction, however, the tortoise is favored. Quick only to retract his vulnerable head and neck, his is the wisest bet, when the slow and sure is preferable to the quick and easy. There comes a time, however, when neither the hare nor the tortoise is the victor. This is when the pastures of the bull lay buried deep beneath the rubble of economic collapse. This is the time of the vulture, and the vulture feeds neither upon the stored-up wealth of the bear or the pastures of the bull. The vulture instead feeds upon the blind denial and ignorance of the ostrich. The time of the vulture is at hand. I heard those words in 1991. What happened is I began studying intensively the Great Depression, the causes of it, for reasons that I didn't know. And so by the time the dot-com bubble burst, I understood really what was going on. And so in 2004, when my friend Marshall Thurber from law school convened the Positive Deviant Network, I made my predictions in March 2007. The article I read to you was a year later in May 2008, and the economic collapse happened that fall in October and September. A year later, Marshall had called in my dear, dear friend, Professor Antal Fekete, to speak at the Bucky event at the Positive Deviant Network. And Antal, he flew him in from Hungary, and Antal gave a talk to us explaining why this economic collapse was inevitable and what was going to happen. That was in October 2008. The following year, I again appeared at Antal's event, his Gold Studies University, and delivered a talk there about the crises that I had predicted. And that's when I met Sandeep Jaitley, who is now a very close friend of mine and colleague. And I interviewed Sandeep later in London in April, and we talked about the economic collapse. And I referred to it because there's a YouTube video of it called The Economic Collapse and the Grain of Sand. And in that interview in London 2009, Sandeep and I talked about was the collapse imminent. And then we said at the time, 11 years ago, we couldn't tell. Last year in 2019, Sandeep and I discussed it, and we said it was then in motion. This is 1 year later. Not only is it in motion, you can see it, you can feel it, and you have no idea where this is going to end up. I have a sense of it, though, because I've been thinking about this for a very long time. Now, in terms of predictions, there was another thing that greatly upset me that I think is relevant to the discussion today, because a few years after I had read, probably 15 years, 20s, 60s, 70s, this is the 80s, 20 years after I had first read Edgar Cayce's writings, I read another book which talked about the crisis that was going to happen, and it said these words: "It is going to appear to you at one point that most people on earth are dying." This set me back. I mean, if you read about earth changes, if you read about economic collapse, that's one thing. If you read about a prediction that says at a certain point in the future, it is going to appear to you that most people on earth are dying. I never forgot those words. And as the COVID crisis has now swept around and enveloped all of us on this earth in April 2008, those words came back to me, and I remembered it. And what those words said was this: the crisis is intended from the universe. And this corresponded with what Bucky Fuller wrote in 1981 when he said, mankind will be entering a period of unprecedented crises that is universally intended to transform humanity into a cooperating, interdependent whole with a higher standard of living than we've ever had before. Now, this is the crisis, I believe. The crisis is meant to transform us. And what I want to offer you as a bit of advice during this time, only perhaps because I have done a lot of reading in this area, but I have not discussed it on this program of moving through the maelstrom, because this has been sort of off topic for me. And for those of you who are interested in my background in this area, I recommend that you go over to a YouTube channel called New Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Michelin. Dr. Jeffrey Michelin got his PhD in parapsychology from the University of California, Berkeley in 1980. I had met Jeffrey 7 years before, and we've remained very, very good friends ever since then. And in December of last year, he instituted a series of interviews with me, which he started posting on his YouTube channel, New Thinking Aloud. And we first did, I think, 4 interviews, and we've got more coming up. And for those of you who are interested in why I am saying things today, I can give you no better references to those interviews that Jeffrey did with me starting last year. And there's more coming, by the way. I think the next one coming is April 6th on his channel. It's not posted yet. But anyway, that part of my life and that part of me reading prepared me for these events today. And the reason why I haven't talked about them because they were so draconian. I mean, scaring people about an economic collapse is one thing, especially when I said you'd buy gold and silver. But scaring them about an event that would be construed as seeing most people dying is a crisis of another level. And I didn't want to quite trot that one out because I think people were having enough trouble thinking that the economy was going to collapse. But it's here. People are going to begin dying on a level that we haven't seen before. And what the advice I got after that, because gold and silver can deal with an economic collapse. And I've always said, though, buy gold, buy silver, have faith. And in my book that I wrote, Time of the Vulture, I said of all these three, faith is the hardest to come by, and you better start getting something now while they're getting still good. That was in 2007. This is 2020. And I believe that there's a reason for this. And if you can understand the reason, you will be better prepared to transit this thing. And even if you don't make it to the other side, as a spiritualist, I believe that we really don't die. That this intervening period we have called life is but a fleeting moment in our eternal state. But that's for you to believe on an individual basis. I'm never trying to get anybody to believe what I wanted to believe, because what I already believe, because I certainly don't believe what other people say, and I expect the same respect from others. But nonetheless, the advice I give you is this. The emotions that are going to come up around this: shock, disbelief, fear, terror, anger, are the reasons this crisis is happening. And my advice to you is don't waste the pain. We're in a crisis far beyond any magnitude that has been predicted, except for the few books that I've read this in. And now that it's happening, it only confirms the belief that I've had today. Don't waste the pain. As the feelings come up, feel them, because this is the purpose of it. It is not, quote, kill us, scare us, break us as human beings. In fact, the opposite is true. That is only through crises we learn. I know this is an individual, and I believe it is true collectively. And this crisis, which is the greatest that has brought us together, it's really ironic when you think about a crisis that has brought the whole planet together on the same page, as is palliative, is to keep us distant from each other during this time. But I think in that distance and in that aloneness, if you don't waste the pain and go deep into yourself and allow the feelings that are being forced to the surface through this crisis to come up, and accept those feelings, don't judge them, accept them and let them out, you will find yourself on a far distant shore with a sense of completion and confidence that you will not have unless you take this advice. Buy gold, buy silver, feel these feelings today, and perhaps it will reinforce the faith that you will gain in the process. Now, there's two things that I want to explain, bring to your attention here, which I sort of didn't expect to say unless we're in the middle of this crisis. Condoms, all right? Now, I read today in the George Gilder report, and I read it other places, that condoms are going to be in short supply. What I want to tell you something is that Martha and I own a condom company. And I want to tell you the background of it, how it came to my life. In 1980, I was in San Francisco. I was a member of Dianne Feinstein's China Committee. I had presidential invitations for Deng Xiaoping's appearance in Washington, D.C. I got those from President Jimmy Carter because I was a member of the National Council for U.S.-China Trade, and I was importing carpets from China for the previous 4 years. And so there I was sitting there in San Francisco, and life was good, and this thought came in my head. The thought was I would be at a party, somebody would ask me what I did, and I would reply, oh, I'm in the rubber business. And as they looked at me, wondering what I meant, I would pull a bunch of condoms out of my pocket. Now, this was 1980. And I remembered it because it was such a stupid thought. It had no relevance. I mean, I had a job. I had a company. I was in import-export business. And yet this thought came in. Well, let me tell you something. 14 years later, I was working for a condom company. I was vice president in charge of sales. And I was at a party in Marin County for one of Martha's friends who was vice president of a very large insurance company. And somebody came up to me and we were talking and we were having a good time. And he looked at me and says, Daryl, what do you do for a living? And then I remembered the line. This is what I'm supposed to say. I'm in the rubber business because I was now. And then I reached in my pocket and I'm supposed to pull out a handful of condoms. The only trouble was I had given those condoms away to Martha's friend 20 minutes before. It was her birthday after all. And I had just started working in this company and I wanted to give her something unusual and I did. The trouble is it ruined my joke. And the joke, which was never really good to begin with, became, it was not worth repeating. I didn't want to tell this person, 14 years ago I had this joke in my head and I don't, because it was too stupid. So I didn't say anything about it. But nonetheless, we did have a condom company. And what happened was, as a result of it, probably 2 years later, Martha, who was a designer, came down the hallway and showed me something. She showed me this. All right? This is exactly what she had done on her computer. And it said, on the Mr. Happy's hat. And I looked at that. There's a little condom, as you can see at the top, a little, on his head for the hat. It's called Mr. Happy's hat. Now, I was head of sales for a condom company. I was selling a lot of condoms. And I looked at that and I said, that's wonderful. And Martha says, no, this is just a joke. And I said, no, that's more than a joke. Well, around 8 years later, a company from Malaysia offered to go into business with us and produce our condoms. And so we did have a company called Mr. Happy's Hat. Here is a can of condoms, canister. And here are some of the condoms in it, all right, that we have. And we have a bona fide company. So today when I read that there was going to be a shortage of condoms because one of the largest condom companies in Malaysia, manufacturing, is shut down, I thought this would be a perfect time to help alleviate some of the strain that some people may be going through. So if you go to our website, Mr. Happy's Hat, here's our hat, all right, which has a special condom package in the middle, www.mrhappyshat.com. It may help you through this crisis, and if you know somebody else that is in need of condoms, not only can we give you financial advice about this economic crisis, we're able to provide you with a goods that can help you through it in these times that are going to be certainly very soon in short supply. I read today that condoms are going to go into sort of disappear in a couple months as they run through, unless they're able to get over this crisis faster than they think. The second thing I wanted to tell you about is not only do we have condoms to get us through, we have, and I pointed this out before, this stuff called Fuller Life Bioactive C60. It is the strongest antioxidant, one among the strongest antioxidants on the planet. And Martha and I take 2 strips a day. in these critical times to help our immune systems. So, these are consequential times, my friends. We don't know if we're going to emerge in what state at the end of it. I do believe we're going to emerge because of who we are. But the danger to all of us is real. And it's going to force us to look at ourselves in a way that we haven't looked at ourselves before. I have always been quite cynical about human nature. I thought as I saw our country get richer and richer, we became more and more selfish. This is going to be a great leveler. This is going to force us to go inside with a focus that we haven't had before. I can personally say that my meditations are far more focused than they've been in years. And I hope that you do the same. Don't waste the pain. There is a silver lining to this, perhaps a golden one, if you wish to avail yourself of it. And before we leave today, I want to leave you with some words that I thought may be of help. We are eternal lights passing through temporal darkness. We cannot be harmed. We are love itself. Good luck.